Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a high-stakes geopolitical reality check that is unfolding right now in the world of AI and hardware. Now, if you've been following the global memory chip shortage, you already know it's an incredibly tight market. But the source material we're unpacking today reveals a massive blind spot, one that could fundamentally alter Europe's technological future. We're going to look closely at who actually holds the cards, who's trapped, and what the real strategies for survival look like in the AI era.
So, let's start with a really strange puzzle. Why on earth is Apple trying to buy from a blacklisted Chinese company? You might have noticed Apple recently raised prices on Macs and iPads, and they directly blamed the global memory shortage. But here's the kicker. They are now actively lobbying Washington for permission to buy memory chips from CXMT. That is a Chinese manufacturer sitting squarely on the Pentagon's blacklist. I mean, when the best-funded hardware company on the planet can no longer just quietly absorb costs and actually has to lobby for a blacklisted supplier, you know for sure the supply chain is under immense pressure.
Section 1. Apple's options versus Europe's reality.
This Apple situation perfectly sets up a stark contrast. It shows us exactly how a well-resourced U.S. tech giant navigates a severe supply chain crisis, compared to how Europe is currently positioned. You see, Apple actually has options to survive this. They have a domestic supplier in Micron, they have massive lobbying power in Washington, and if push comes to shove, they have the Chinese market as an emergency exit. Europe, on the other hand, they have absolutely none of that. No domestic memory champion, zero lobbying leverage in Seoul or Hsinchu, and no emergency exit. It's a brutal geopolitical reality check. The shortage that's just kind of uncomfortable for Apple completely exposes Europe's blind spot. They're trapped.
The entire problem boils down to this single number, 0. Out of the 3 or 4 meaningful DRAM makers left in the entire world, companies you know like Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron, exactly 0 are European. Commodity DRAM, which is the working memory in literally every machine, and especially HBM, that's the stacked high-performance memory feeding AI accelerators, they are made almost entirely outside of Europe. The fabrication sits in East Asia, the design sits in the US, and Europe has a grand total of 0 major players on the board.
To put that into a broader perspective, the European Union manufactures less than 10% of the world's semiconductors by value. According to the European Commission's own words, they are almost entirely dependent on the United States and Asia. This leaves them completely reliant on outside forces for the high-performance memory that is absolutely critical for powering the AI revolution.
And wow, does that dependence come with a painful financial reality? Memory prices have roughly quadrupled over just 3 quarters, and in some specific segments, the year-over-year rise is closer to a 6-fold increase. Because Europe has no domestic production to buffer these costs, they're essentially a pure price taker. They just have to pay these exorbitant prices with absolutely no influence over them whatsoever.
Section 2. The Dead 20% Dream.
So what has Brussels tried to do about this massive vulnerability? Well, in December 2025, the European Court of Auditors delivered this pretty bitter verdict. Europe exports its brilliance. Basically, what this means is that while Europe absolutely has the brain power, the world-class research, and the initial innovation, they completely lack the actual manufacturing infrastructure to build the physical technology at scale. They invent it, but it gets manufactured somewhere else.
And here's the thing. You can't just fix this with standard policy tools like subsidies or regulation. It's been reported that OpenAI alone has locked up roughly 40% of global DRAM wafer production all the way through 2029. Brussels can't simply regulate or subsidize chips into existence on a useful timetable when US hyperscalers and AI labs have already aggressively hoarded the physical supply of HBM and DRAM wafers for the next several years. You literally cannot order into existence what physically isn't there.
Which means the grand dream of the 2023 EU Chips Act is kind of hitting a brick wall of reality. The original clear goal was autarky, complete self-reliance by doubling Europe's global market share to 20% by 2030. They mobilized 43 billion euros for this whole shebang, but the Commission's own figures now admit they're probably only going to hit about 11.7% market share by 2030. In fact, the European Court of Auditors called that 20% target simply very unlikely.
250 billion euros. That is ASML's staggering estimate of what it would actually cost Europe to hit that 20% target. That's just way more money than is currently available. And it's exactly why flagship fabrication projects, like the Intel plant in Magdeburg or the ST Micro plant in Krols, are stalling or collapsing. The dense, incredibly complex supplier ecosystem that Taiwan and Korea built up over decades, it just cannot be subsidized into existence by statute overnight.
Section 3.
Europe's hidden choke point power.
Now, while Europe might be struggling on the supply side, the other side of the ledger tells a very different and actually super exciting story. Europe controls several massive upstream choke points that absolutely no one else in the world can route around. Think about it. You have ASML in the Netherlands holding a world monopoly on EUV lithography. Those are the machines without which no leading-edge chips can even exist. You have Zeiss with its precision optics, world-class research institutions like IMEC, CLAT, and Fraunhofer, plus heavy hitters like Infineon, NXP, and ST Microelectronics. Europe might not assemble the final AI chips, but they hold an absolute monopoly on the tools needed to make them.
To really grasp how powerful this leverage is on the global chessboard, just consider this one fact. U.S. export controls against China only function with Dutch cooperation. That is genuine, undeniable geopolitical power. It proves that Europe sits at the indispensable, highly critical upstream stages of the entire AI era.
Section 4. Sovereignty through indispensability.
This is the new, much more realistic strategy that's rapidly gaining traction in Brussels over the failed idea of complete self-reliance. Indispensability means building out those controlled choke points so that both your partners and your rivals have a hard, calculated self-interest in keeping you supplied. It's mutual dependence acting as insurance. The logic makes total sense. If rivals are fundamentally dependent on ASML's lithography machines or Zeiss precision optics, well, they are definitely going to think twice before turning off Europe's tap for memory or AI chips.
Section 5. How to reduce dependence.
Leveraging those choke points is only half the battle, though. The other half is taking immediate action today instead of waiting for impossible fab calendars to catch up. For developers and tech leaders, this is a direct mandate. If Brussels can't close the fab gap, we have to fundamentally need less hardware. That means building local-first AI instead of relying entirely on the cloud. It means leveraging open weights, deploying highly efficient models, using quantization to shrink model sizes, and just relying on right-sized hardware. By doing all this, you directly insulate yourself from those insane 6x price hikes we talked about earlier.
And that brings us to the most provocative question we can ask today. Can Europe survive the AI era not by building more, but by needing less? This memory shortage is a true sovereignty test. Sure, Europe is failing on the supply side, but they still hold immense leverage in their hand. If the real answer is to bury the autarky dream, fiercely defend those massive choke points, and relentlessly cut dependence, then the future of geopolitical tech strategy might look very different than any of us thought. So what do you think? It's a fascinating puzzle and absolutely crucial for understanding where the global hardware race is heading next. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.